The fire inside the cave might not be the best idea because A, it melts all the snow and then drips onto your fire and then your fire goes out. And then the smoke would probably smoke you out. But fire as a light source, amazing. Look at that shot. Hey GQ, I'm Jimmy Chin and this is The Breakdown. $127 hours. This is clearly a very critical moment and scene in the film as Aaron Ralston falls into the canyon. And I know Aaron was there consulting on this, so trying to make it as accurate depiction of what happened to him. I'm sure for Danny, the director, this, how do we establish what happens to him? Like really give a sense to people like what actually happened, how he fell, what's going on. The pacing of the scene's really cool. There's this like principal action where he takes the fall. They show his, a cutaway of this totally different, item, his headphones like falling slow motion onto the ground. And then you really get a view of, without having to describe it, what happens. And that's hard to do, without someone actually saying it and really making it feel like, okay, this is real. I love the moments when he looks up in the sky. It's like this one scene is like paced. It's got a lot of different kind of really cool pacing in it. Then it's quiet. Really trying to get into the head of Aaron here, or at least in the real character of Aaron, but of what it must be like to kind of realize in this moment you're trapped and like taking in his environment, like he's assessing where he is, and those shots kind of get into the character's head, like, oh, where am I? This is basically establishing I'm trapped in this place. They have a lot of different camera angles. Like there's a top-down shot that's like really cool and establishes like he's in this narrow passageway. There's some shots just like real close up on his arm to really show how it's wedged in there. And then it shows this point of view, as he looks up to the sky. All of that is storyboarded out to really establish like what happens here. And I think they do a really wonderful job here. The Revenant. The fire inside the cave might not be the best idea because A, it melts all the snow and then drips onto your fire and then your fire goes out. And then the smoke would probably smoke you out. But fire as a light source, amazing. Look at that shot. I'm not sure if they had any other light sources in this shot of the cave, but it draws the eye to this little cave. It gives you a real sense of the setting and the scale of the place and the landscape, and clearly shows he's just trying to survive the night. Oftentimes, the best ways to survive are not necessarily the greatest for cinematographers. I deal with that a lot, where you're like, oh, we're on the side of a mountain and I'm shooting, and you're like, this shot would be absolutely mind-blowing if they were a little further out on that ridge and profiled against the sky, and that's not usually something I can suggest because you're in the middle of a climb. The best shots are shots that you wouldn't normally see just standing at eye level. Like that's what we all see all the time. And so with a camera, you can kind of, you're really looking for a shot that brings the audience into the moment. And if you want to get creative, it's like moving the camera somewhere other than like the normal eye level. Like you're trying to find shots that are low, that give a different perspective than you normally see. I'm kind of a believer in creating shots that don't necessarily draw attention to a shot. You really want to have the shot be in service of the story and the moment and the film. Using, what I think is a great technique, which is getting in really tight, feeling really intimate with Leo, in that moment, but then also doing these huge, big, expansive shots to give you a sense of scale and the environment he's in. Just overall stunning. Shooting in these kinds of environments where it's very, very cold, extremely tough on crews, you know, because you're not just dealing with, you know, managing, you know, the personnel and the crew and their safety and equipment, you know, in this kind of environment is really hard to manage. Oftentimes, you know, you have to keep the batteries warm because they completely deplete when they get really cold. So you're constantly carrying batteries either on yourself, like in your pockets. Sometimes we'll tape hand warmers around the batteries to try to keep them warm. There's just a lot of considerations in terms of how to prep your cameras, how to prep your crew. I know from what I've heard and read, you know, that this was an extremely difficult shoot. I did run into the director, Inarritu, at one point, and he told me that he watched Meru and showed Meru to his crew, referencing Meru, that this is really hard filming conditions, maybe shaming them into thinking that their conditions weren't as hard, but that's what he told me. It's amazing how much of your life is spent either, especially in these cold environments, melting snow and ice for water, and like moving solar panels to follow the sun when there's sun, if there's sun. Battery power is like this constant issue out in the field when you're on remote expedition shoots. I don't think they had that problem on the Revenant though, because I think they had other resources and opportunities to charge their batteries. Into the wild.
Is there anybody here? Guess not!
Funny enough, I actually climbed Kilimanjaro with Emil Hirsch. Spent a few weeks with him. If this was storyboarded out for the DP, a lot of the conversation would also be, okay, how are we gonna get each of these shots? We're gonna block it out. But really what's most important to me is like the intention of this scene. This is the nuts and bolts of like what we need to establish. Experiencing the isolation with this character, being out there, he has kind of a moment of levity. In the scene, I feel like you're experiencing the landscape and being isolated in this huge place. You kind of move inward as the character moves inward, and then it finishes with him kind of like stepping out and then like being back in this amazing wilderness, and it's this shot of like absolute awe and beauty, and it just ties up that scene so perfectly. The beauty of shooting up north in Alaska in like the spring is that the days start to get really long, but the sun stays really low on the horizon, so you have like a lot of really good shooting hours and beautiful light for a good part of the day. You know, the worst light and the most challenging light to shoot in is, especially when you're just using natural light, is when the sun's straight above you and it's just like, you know, everybody's eyes are black because the contrast of, it's just bad light. You never really want to shoot in that. But when you're shooting outdoors, in these kind of environments, you're often relegated to what's available, and the best light during the days are in the morning and in the evening. This is really beautiful, kind of saturated, probably sunset or maybe sunrise shots. You know, it looks like there's a little cloud cover, but enough for light to get through, so everything's kind of painted with this like really saturated colors. That's kind of the light that you know, always aim for or dream of. On expedition shoots, you don't have the luxury of like getting things set up and facing the right way for the best light, and you kind of have to make do with what you have. When we were shooting with Alex on Free Solo, let's say for instance, he couldn't climb El Cap in the light because it'd be a lot less friction, you're hot. It was always challenging because he would be climbing in this really shady wall, and then the ground below would be like really bright, hot light. And so every time you were framing a shot, you're trying to like deal with this huge range of dynamic range of light, you know, blasted out, blown out, midday light on this like really bright ground below, and then this really dark, shady wall. That's always kind of a challenge. Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. I'm often thinking about angles and how to shoot something to tell the story. A bunch of the earlier shots in here, are shot from the ground, kind of looking up. And whenever you have like these shots looking up, you really make the characters, you give them a certain amount of weight, because like if you're shooting portraitures, it's the same thing. It's like shooting them straight on is one look, but when you dip below the eye line and you place someone up high, it's like visually putting them on a pedestal, right? So you can portray people a certain way just by the angle of how you shoot them. In this case, this shot from above that really establishes, that's kind of cool. There's some foreground elements. The people are framed perfectly. There's these kind of like leading lines that draw your eye into where these main protagonists are. And then you have like this perfectly lit monument. There is a lot of contrast. I think they wanted the light on the main monument that they see there. That can be really challenging, is figuring out like, okay, well, how are we gonna shoot this? What time of day are we gonna shoot this? This is the only time it's gonna get light, but it's gonna be extremely contrasty. And then oftentimes what happens is like, okay, you kind of establish like which things you're gonna prioritize as getting this light during the day. And then you kind of lean into whatever you're given. So, when they come through the canyon there, it's kind of shady. It is dramatic, as they come out of the shade into the light, and it's kind of like this moment when they come into the light figuratively and actually physically, discovering this spot. And then if I was looking at this through an expedition mindset, I start looking at the walls on either side of that monument, and they look like there's probably some pretty good climbing there too. Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. When you're in a helicopter shooting a shot like this, it's not just the camera person, especially one with this big of a move. The aerial DP is making calls on the radio with the pilot as well, and they're probably sitting together, or at least DP sitting in the back seat of the helicopter, being like, okay, crab left, crab left, crab left, and it just means that the helicopter's kind of crabbing, like rotating around this thing, and it's trying to keep one level. So, these kind of shots, the heli pilots have to be as good as the DP in a way, and usually they're a team, so they work together a lot. I'm sure Peter Jackson had resources to have like a very, very good aerial DP and a very, very good heli pilot. So very cool shot, just kind of wrapping around, and then they kind of pull back. That's probably the hardest shot in there. Shooting in the mountains in particular is very difficult for aerials because the mountains just topographically are obviously like very mountainous. So that means that there's a lot of air moving, especially in the evening and in the mornings when there's like a differential between the air temperatures. So that means there's uplifts or downdrafts. Those happen to be the best times to shoot in the mountains for light. There could be a ton of turbulence. I mean, these gyro-stabilized cameras are amazing. They have like 16 gyros in it, so even when the helicopter is kind of bouncing around. But if you're trying to do a really steady move in the mountains and you're like moving over a ridge that then has like huge updraft, like It's complicated. There's a lot of things that you have to think about when you're filming aerials in the mountains, and it's dangerous. And you need really high-powered helicopters, probably like a B3, which just means like a type of helicopter that's got a lot of power, because the air is thinner at altitude, and there's a lot less lift for the helicopters. Sometimes when we fly aerial shots in the mountains, we really trim down the crew, strip down the helicopter, make sure most of the weight is just for the DP, that pilot, maybe the aerial director, and then the big gyro stabilized system, camera system. Prepping for something like this, it'll probably start on a storyboard, and then the DP and the director and then the heli pilot are all probably sitting down with the AD and everybody else, but principally talking about like what are they trying to achieve in this shot, then how are they going to achieve the shot. And oftentimes, you know, when we have something like that's this complicated, we'll focus on like, okay, this is what we want to achieve, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do a safety shot, which is like kind of our most kind of conservative way to shoot this shot. And until you get that kind of safety shot in the can, you're not trying like all kinds of other stuff. But if you feel really good about you know, I think we have that shot, and then you've got a little bit more budget or time in the moment, because, you know, if it's like an insane sunset, or like in this case, like crazy cloud scenario, which might or might not be CG. Once you've got your safety shot and you feel like you've nailed that, then you can move on to like trying a few other shots that you might have in mind, or the DP really wanted but didn't want to risk, you know, blowing the shot. Point Break. This is shot at Chopu, which is a very notoriously huge and gnarly wave. I remember hearing a few friends who were on this production as the surfers or running safety on this thing. When Point Break was being made, a lot of people, I guess in my sphere, worked on it. This is big, you know, kind of action adventure sports movie. So a lot of people in the industry got the call in to come shoot on this project. They brought in kind of the best of the best who shoot each of these individual sports, which is definitely a smart idea, because A, this is what they shoot. They know the angles, they know all the different ways it's been shot, what are options and what are not options, because sometimes a director might come in and be like, so I want this shot. And as a DP, you really try to get that shot, but you know, there are limitations to places like this or activities like this in terms of how you can shoot. But you're always trying to push, you know, what's a new angle that's never been shot before, and what would it take to get that shot? And then you try to figure it out. When you bring in someone who does shoot this stuff, it serves multiple purposes, again, because they know all the angles. They've shot at Chopu a ton of times, a ton of seasons. They know when the right, you know, they're tracking the swells. They know when it's going to be huge. They know what seasons. There's all kinds of things that are tied into shooting, you know, at a place like this, because it has to be perfect conditions, which is challenging. You know, it's like you can't just make this thing happen and have the wave breaking as big as it is right there. You can keep it authentic, and hopefully they're also consulting on like, this is what they do, this is how they would be on the boat, this is what they would wear, this is how they would talk, this is, you know, these are the things that they should be talking about if they're on the boat. I'm sure they have all kinds of consultants, not just, you know, the DP talking about it, but the, you know, having someone who shoots this sport, this lifestyle, this place has huge advantages. Lawrence of Arabia.
Beto.
It's incredible to see, you know, how much space you're given in this shot. It's quiet. there's only a few words spoken, but you know, there's so much tension that happens just in the way that they shoot it. There's all this suspense in what this figure is and who that figure is coming through the mirage there. It's interesting because like in the Sahara and in desert landscapes like this, the landscape is really uniform. This happens up in the in like huge snowy places like and plateaus on like in Tibet as well. Everything is so uniform in color. You know, it's sky and sand or sky and snow. So when there's anything that breaks that up, your eye is drawn to it. And in this case, you have this like perfectly framed figure all clad in black, breaking up this like very desolate landscape. And so, you know, your eye is immediately drawn to this thing and you can't tell what it is. The character can't tell what it is, but it's coming towards you and it seems like imminent danger. Shooting in the desert has its challenges too. You know, one of the things that has gotten me and happens, I'm sure, on productions, instead of dealing with rain and moisture and like lenses fogging up, you're dealing with this really fine dust particles that get into all the mechanics of these lenses, and they somehow infiltrate everything. Managing sand is one issue, and you get these sandstorms. Like in the Sahara, the Harmattan winds come in and it's just, you can't really see, and it blows this ultra fine dust, sand, and it penetrates everything. Like zippers break because you can't even, so there's challenges there. And then the heat can be debilitating as well. The beach. In general, we're small crews and pretty low profile when we're, especially in like remote locations when we're shooting. Bigger commercial shoots or shoots where you have like 50 to 100, or, you know, you do have to think about, you know, how you're going to impact an area, particularly if it's in the wilderness. So, you know, I think there's just like basic principles of like leave no trace. I'm sure that now there's a lot of restrictions and guidelines about coming into a place like this, but when you're shooting in countries where there's fewer regulations, you kind of have to take it upon yourself to kind of, you know, mitigate your impact and kind of carry that ethos of leave no trace and making sure that, you know, you're leaving an area the same or better than you found it. Thanks so much for watching these clips with me. Hopefully you learned something, and until next time.